Good morning, dear ones, and welcome to Unity Church. A very special welcome to those of you who are visiting us today. This morning, we tune in from our singular rooms to join together in worship. Welcome to this time we set aside each week to help us find and keep our balance, to think about those things that matter most, to root out racism in ourselves and in the world, and to align ourselves to integrity, service, and joy. We understand that becoming anti-racist is a daily and ongoing practice, not a statement. Here in the sanctuary, your worship leaders gather, taking appropriate precautions, learning as we lead to offer clarity, comfort, and inspiration in these trying times. We know that nothing can replace the face-to-face, hand-in-hand, voices raised in song, embodied worship can bring. We also know that the ministry we share has never been about a building. This church is not closed. After the service, whether this is your first time with us or you've been here your whole life, you're invited to participate in a virtual Zoom coffee hour where we share a bit about our lives with each other and get to know each other more deeply. Stay for just a few minutes or stay up to 45 minutes to connect in smaller breakout rooms. Information about how to participate is available at Unity's homepage, and the link to coffee hour will be shared at the end of this service. If you would like to learn more about Unity Church and Unitarian Universalism, we invite you to participate in Finding Yourself at Unity today at 1 p.m. This week's one-hour online class will offer an overview of Unity's worship and liturgical year. Information about how to connect with the class is available on our homepage. In this time of pandemic, we know that gifts of healing and renewal flow from simple gestures that we share in the presence of one another, even while physically distanced. For the first in a series of in-person and safely distanced monthly gatherings, we invite all of you to stop by the church building this afternoon between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. to help create a photo collage of the congregation. Bring a headshot of yourself or a close-up of your family to the main entrance on Portland Avenue to add to the collage. Alternately, you can send your photo to unityunitarian.org and it will also be included. Next Sunday, as we close out our August theme of Journey, Reverend Rob Eller-Isaacs and Laura Park, Unity's Acting Director of Membership and Hospitality, will ponder the questions, where to? What next? In the coming days and weeks, we will continue to find new ways to come together for worship, for learning, for deep connection, for justice making, and for love. Welcome and stay tuned.
Along that journey, there are highs and lows, triumphs and trauma, bliss and misery. There are moments of injury, and there's healing from those injuries. We may not recognize the impact of those events at the time, and we may not perceive the healing that follows. But the ebb and flow of that process shapes each of us and defines how we interact with the world. Journey as healing, healing as a journey. Come, let us worship together.
and take the hope of dreams in trust to keep us day by day. A long, long way the sea winds blow, but somewhere lies a shore. Thus down the tide of time shall flow my dreams forevermore.
Let's read responsively this excerpt from Joy Harjo's poem, For Calling the Spirit Back from Wandering the Earth in Its Human Feet. Let go the pain you are holding in your mind, your shoulders, your heart, all the way to your feet. Let go the pain of your ancestors to make way for those who are heading our direction. Ask for forgiveness. Call upon the help of those who love you. These helpers take many forms: animals, element, bird, angel, saint, stone, or ancestor. Call your spirit back. It may be caught in corners and creases of shame, judgment, and human abuse. You must call in a way that your spirit will want to return. Speak to it as you would to a beloved child. Welcome your spirit back from its wandering. It may return in pieces, in tatters. Gather them together. They will be happy to be found after being lost for so long. Please join me in a moment of silent reflection.
Each time we gather for worship, we set aside a moment to expand the caring ministry of this congregation. Together, we recognize the cycle of life and death, the circle of love, compassion, and witness that is at the center of this and of every sacred community. We stand at the side of parents and teachers and all those whose primary spiritual practice is caring for children, with those who live with grief or chronic pain, with illnesses seen and unseen, with mental disability or addiction. We pray for our neighbors in prison, for those who care for family members in ill health, and those who are struggling to stay afloat in the midst of poverty. Our lives are blessed by those who knowingly and with curiosity and courage face their final days, and by those who rise above the heartbreak to challenge oppression in all of its forms. We pray for those in harm's way, for the wisdom and strength of the leaders of the world, and for the people of this courageous congregation as together we live into our longing to embody and help to build the beloved community. Will you pray with me for all these we now name? We mourn the death and celebrate the life of Kathy Bergstead Fabian, a longtime member of Unity Church who served for some years as a treasured member of our religious education staff. Kathleen died 2 weeks ago after a brief struggle with COVID-19. A family graveside service is being planned. We also mourn the death and celebrate the life of J.P. Haran Kimsel, who died at home surrounded by his loving family. J.P. had been living with Huntington disease for a number of years and has been lovingly cared for by his beloved wife, Laura, and son, Caden, and friends and family members. Memorial service plans are pending. We hold Mark Olson, dear friend of Liz Severin and John Early, who was seriously injured in a bicycling accident in west central Minnesota yesterday. He was airlifted to Fargo Merit Care for surgery this afternoon. And we also pray for his wife, Cindy, who is with him there. We continue to send healing thoughts and prayers to Jenny Johnson and other members and friends who are recovering from the coronavirus. We hold those firefighters, the earth itself, all the families who have been evacuated and who are finding it hard to breathe in the parched lands of California. May we find ways for these fires to be put out and lives be saved. And we are thrilled to announce the birth of 2 more Redeemers. Lee Carey and Terry Linsky are delighted to share the news of the birth of their first grandchild, Hudson James Linsky, born August 16th. The proud and sleepless parents are Lee and Terry's son, Peter, and his wife, Cara. Lee and Terry anxiously await the day they can safely hold their precious grandson. Until then, they will love him from a distance, knowing he and his parents can feel the boundless affection in their hearts. And Barbara Svoboda and her family welcomed granddaughter Margot Michelle Kazelnak, who was born a day later on August 17th. As Barbara says, it's hard to see smile through the masks, but she was beaming. And lastly, we acknowledge all the currents of grief flowing all over the planet as lives are compromised or lost to the coronavirus. Every day, people are getting sick, some of whom are struggling to recover, some of whom are lost to the virus. Every day, the grief grows. May we each light a candle of healing, memorializing all that has been lost, and for those finding their way into an altered life. And in these days of turning, we are especially aware not only of close family and friends, but also the fact that in the eyes of God, there are no other people's children. May this deep knowing encourage and sustain us as we seek to be instruments of a healing love in the heart of this beautiful and broken world. May we stand in compassionate solidarity with our neighbors here at home and all around the world. May they and may we be instruments of a lasting peace. I now invite you to speak aloud or to hold in the silent sanctuary of your hearts the names of those you would like to lift today in worship. And let us pray. Spirit of life, Spirit of mystery and love, God of many names and beyond all naming, God of our being and becoming which flows within, among, and beyond us. Guide us in our days as we seek to be led by the lessons of love that call us to listen more deeply, to greet people with as few assumptions as we can, to greet people with open hearts, even in the midst of the pandemic, that we find ways for love and mercy and tenderness to trump the fear and the divisiveness. May we find ways, even with our masks on, even with physical distance, to spread love, caring, and presence. May it be so, and amen.
to me, come to me.
From my childhood in Korea, I still remember the elders saying, stories are medicine. I remember the village shamans or healers telling stories that would be part of rituals of healing. In fact, in many ancient cultures, storytellers and healers were often one and the same. So this morning, a story from Buddhism, from the Therigatha, or verses of the elder nuns. I want to invite the children who are joining us, come a little closer for the story of healing. Thousands of years ago, in the time of the Buddha, there was a woman whose name was Kisa Gotami. She was married and she gave birth to her beautiful son. One day, suddenly, her son, her child, fell sick. And soon thereafter, no matter what Kisa Gotami tried, he died. The mother refused to believe that her beautiful child had died, and so she wrapped her child in a blanket, and she carried him frantically, going from neighbor to house to house. "You must have medicine to wake up my child," she said. "Can you give me medicine to wake up my child?" And the neighbors lifted the blanket and, seeing the face of the child, knew that the mother had lost her mind to grief. She went from house to house, from neighbor to neighbor, until one day a person on the street looked into her grief and said to her, "I have no medicine to help you, but if anyone has medicine, it would be the Buddha. Go, for he is staying nearby, and ask him for medicine." So Kisa Gotami quickly hurried, and she found herself standing before the Buddha and asked him, "My child is asleep, is sick. Surely you must have medicine to wake my child from sleep." And the Buddha looked, and the Buddha knew that the child was dead. But the Buddha looked with compassion on Kisa Gotami and said to her, "My good woman, there may indeed be medicine for your child, but you must help me to find such medicine. Go and bring back to me mustard seeds. But remember this, it must be a mustard seed from a family, from a house that has not experienced death. Else it will be of no use." Kisa Gotami bowed deeply to the Buddha and hurried home and left the corpse of her child on the bed. And alone she went into the night looking for such a mustard seed. She knocked on every house. She went from neighbor to neighbor in her village, and she asked for mustard seeds, and no one refused her. Hello, yes, we have mustard seeds, and we would be glad to share a handful of mustard seed with you and more. But Kisa Gotami remembered, and she said to them, has your house or anyone in the house experienced death? And the response was the same from neighbor to neighbor. One neighbor said, "Oh, Kisa, have you forgotten? It was not even a year ago where we lost both our grandparents. And I remember how you brought food to us. That was so kind." And she knocked on another neighbor's house, and the response was likewise, "Oh, Kisa, have you forgotten? It was 10 years ago, or more than 10 years ago, that we lost our eldest son, Shanjata, but it feels just like yesterday. The two of you, I remember, used to be such good childhood friends." Or another neighbor, "Hello, Kisa. Yes, we would be glad to share mustard seeds, but have we lost someone we loved? Of course. I lost my wife, and you know this. For when I was lost in my grief, you welcomed my daughters into your home, and you took care of them until I could find my way." At every house, the response was the same. And with each house to each house, Kisa Gotami found herself with tears falling from her eyes as her neighbors told stories of loss and grief and death. Kisa Gotami's heart ached knowing that she would find no mustard seed from a house that had never been visited by death. But what she did find, she thought, were neighbors. Neighbors who shared stories that were like her story. Stories that bound her to their life. Stories that brought her back to the embrace of her community, to a healing that she had not thought possible. Kisa Gotami walked back to the Buddha in the forest, and he asked, "Have you brought me the mustard seed?" "No," she said, "for there was no house or family that I could find who had not experienced death and loss and grief. Everyone suffers. But Lord Buddha, you knew that surely. And in truth, I also knew that. But knowing that was never the medicine. I think the medicine was going out and knocking on every door and talking to every neighbor in the village, sharing stories of sorrow and grief, stories of hope, and even stories of joy, stories that connected them to my story, stories that brought me back to others and their care, stories that brought me into the embrace of a love that would hold me stronger than death. That was the real medicine, Buddha, was it not? And the Buddha smiled, and he said, "Come and sit by me, my sister. May I share with you the stories that I have been waiting to share." And so the journey of healing continued. And may it be so for us. Amen.
Though our ministry is now largely online, the church's financial obligations continue. Your support of the church is an expression of the promises we make to each other and to the world. We know that some of you have had your hours reduced and that some of you are furloughed or have lost your job. Please let us know if you're facing financial difficulty. We're here to help. But don't let fear undermine your commitment to the ministry we share. Please do your best to be generous with the church so that the church can in turn maintain our staff and programs and keep our promises to the many community partners our Sunday offerings support. Today, the larger portion of our offering will support Barack and Michelle Obama Elementary School, located across the street from Unity Church. Many members and friends have supported the staff and scholars at the school through tutoring, work in the library, funding grocery store gift cards for families with food insecurity, and more. We know that the challenges of distance learning are complex and that our continued support is needed. The money collected today will help provide virtual music education for all 270 children through a connection with Walker West Music Academy and Stepping Stone Theater. Additionally, the funds will purchase small gifts of thanks and recognition for the spectacular teachers and staff. During the offering interlude, please visit Unity's homepage and follow the link in the Sunday service section to make your donation. You can also use the give function located in our Shelby Next membership app and online database, or mail a check to the church. And thank you for your generous donations.
Little Prayer by Danez Smith. Let ruin end here. Let him find honey where there was once slaughter. Let him enter the lion's cage and find a field of lilacs. Let this be the healing, and if not, let it be.
The Day with All Its Pain Ahead is Yours by Derek Walcott. The day with all its pain ahead is yours. The ceaseless creasing of the morning sea, the fluttering gamboge cedar leaves allegro, the rods of the yawning branches trolling the breeze, the rusted meadows, the wind-whitened grass, the coos of the stone-colored ground doves on the road, the echo of benediction on a house, its rooms of pain, its veranda of remorse, when joy lanced through its open doors like a hummingbird out to the garden and the pool in which the sky has fallen. These are all yours, and pain has made them brighter, as absence does after a death, as the light heals the grass.
When I was 10 years old, my father went to see his doctor for a routine checkup, and some test results made the doctor decide to have my dad check into the hospital for overnight observation. That night in the hospital, my dad had a massive coronary, one that would have killed him had he been anywhere else. Not unlike the stark divide for all of us with this pandemic, what life was like before mid-March and what it's become since then, November 29th, 1966, is a date that's written large in my family's history. Before the heart attack, my dad was a big and boisterous guy, smart and funny, quick with a story or joke, pragmatic and decisive. And to a shy and introverted child like me, he was pretty intimidating. After the heart attack, he spent 6 weeks in our town's hospital. And when he came home the following January, he was thin and gaunt. He was quiet and reflective. It was as if the person who'd gone into the hospital in November had disappeared, and he was replaced by a different person. At first, it took all his effort just to get up and down the few steps that separated the main floor from the upstairs of our split-level home. Over the next few months, he made little progress. And after a visit to a specialist in nearby New York City, it was determined that the best path for recovery was open-heart surgery and the implantation of an artificial mitral valve to replace the one that had been irreparably damaged by the coronary. The surgery, which took place in June of 1967, was a complete success. After another 6 weeks in the hospital in New York, my dad returned home. But this time, he got better with each passing day. First, it was walking, then swimming. He eventually returned to work. His sparkle returned too, albeit somewhat subdued. But the medical crisis my dad went through permanently changed how he encountered the world and how he interacted with other people. For my older siblings, who had spent most of their childhoods with the old dad, it was a struggle to reconcile those memories with the new dad, who was profoundly changed by his medical trial by fire. But because I'd been so young in that before time, the new dad was easier for me to connect with. Someone who was open and vulnerable, who could listen as well as speak. In fact, all of my childhood memories and my cherished memories of my father date from that time forward. Sitting in the front yard and hearing the loudspeaker from the nearby high school football field, just waiting to hear my sister's name called as she received her diploma. Dad was still too weak to attend the ceremony in person. His first post-op vacation, a driving trip the following summer to Cape Hatteras. It was the first time ever that I'd been the only kid on the family vacation. And the nightly interactions at dinner, wide-ranging discussions from current events and politics and science and engineering, his field, to the arts. The journey to health was a painful one for my dad, and it's not anything that I would ever wish for anyone to go through. But I think because of it, he and I developed a relationship that might never have occurred had he remained healthy. It's just like this pandemic, which has brought tragedy and heartbreak for millions of people all over the world. There is some good that has resulted. I cling to that good.
These past few months have been a never-ending slog of pain, grief, sickness, strife, and uncertainty. It may come as no surprise that the idea of healing has been an elusive one, at least for me. We started the year with an impeachment, and then came the pandemic, lockdown, isolation, for some of us unemployment, children stuck at home, and then George Floyd's murder. How do we even begin the journey to wholeness? Where is that map to indicate the trailhead? How do we get up off our knees to take that first step? The day with all its pain ahead is yours, Derek Walcott said in his poem of the same name. The word for day in French is jour. It follows then that each day is itself a journey. It makes it easier, I think, less overwhelming to believe that each day is the start of a new journey, that each day offers up a new opportunity for healing. The ceaseless creasing of the morning sea, the rusted meadows, the coos of the stone-colored doves on the road, the echo of benediction on the house, its rooms of pain, its veranda of remorse, when joy lanced through its open-hearted door. These are all yours, the poet says, and pain has made them brighter, as absence does after a death, as the light heals the grass. My family of origin was a camping family. Every summer through my teen years, we set out for 3 or 4 weeks to commune with nature. It was like a religion for my dad. We covered the West Coast from Vancouver, British Columbia to Ensenada, Mexico, staying in state parks and county parks, national parks, city parks, in the mountains, in the forests, deserts, and on the beach. And we were water babies from the outset, diving fearlessly into any and all bodies of water, from swimming pools, rivers, creeks, lakes, and the ocean. Our dad, however, rarely joined us. And when he did, he kept his undershirt on. We never, ever saw him bare-chested. When we asked our mom why, she would only say coyly that it had something to do with a war wound, that he was self-conscious about it. We knew instinctively not to inquire further. There were certain subjects that we knew not to probe. The war, in Dad's case, the Second World War, being the most fraught. Over the years, we learned the myriad of hardships my dad endured in Japanese-occupied Philippines, the loss of family and friends, his harrowing escapes as an army captain responsible for locating the source of enemy communications, having to keep his white American mother, his Filipino wife, and their 2 toddlers hidden away in the mountains, all the while knowing his father, a Philippine naval officer, had been captured, the location unknown. Afterwards, he suffered the loss of his first wife to TB and his own 2-year rehabilitation in a hospital from that disease. It seemed a miracle that he not only survived, but managed to return to the States, attend university, remarry, welcome 4 more kids, build a career in government shipping, and move us all to the burbs, the only family of color for miles. And then he threw himself into local politics, his church, and his neighborhood association. He'd healed from his physical wounds, from the bullet that penetrated his upper arm, the malaria, the tuberculosis, but from his emotional wounds, despite his successes, I'm sometimes not so sure. While his sense of humor was legendary, my dad was not only extremely demanding, but he had a wicked, quick temper that we all, to some extent, fell victim to. While rare, those moments cast a shadow on some family memories, particularly for my younger brothers. Now, looking back, I can see that he leaned on us, his family, to salve his pain. And engaging fully with his community provided him with agency, control over his life and his destiny, preventing him from collapsing under the weight of those things he could not control. The accidental death of his teenage son, my half-brother, being perhaps the most crushing. Bestowing on us a love of nature and travel was his insurance that his children would experience the type of joy that would carry us through hardship and the kind of pain that he knew only too well. It was a pathway to healing. Recently, I listened to a story on a podcast about a young man who survived a shark attack while paddleboarding with his family in Hawaii. It was obviously a horrific experience, and in this telling, the details were not spared. Who doesn't love a good shark tale? But I will spare you. He lost part of his leg, but if you were able to see him on the street, you wouldn't notice. With his prosthesis, he walked with hardly a limp. He said that prior to the accident, he was a normal, ambitious 20-something, working at both a startup and a hedge fund, enjoyed many good friends, and led an active social life. It took a year for him to recover physically from his wounds, but afterward, he was a different person. To his family, friends, and colleagues, he was overly aggressive, even ruthless at work, and unpleasant to be around. Finally, his mother, who had cared for him and seen him through his whole recovery, confronted him and told him that he was barely recognizable as her son, that he had become, as she put it, a jerk. Enter the celebrated trauma specialist, Bessel van der Kolk. Van der Kolk has worked for decades with war veterans and other victims of serious trauma. He listened carefully to the young man's story and knew almost immediately what was going on. He explained that such catastrophic experiences carry with them a heavy burden of shame and self-blame, that those who experience them can often not forgive themselves. The anger and aggressive behavior was a manifestation of his inability to forgive himself for what had happened. Now, he had no way of knowing that a shark would mistake him for prey that day. But until he could accept that he was not at fault for his accident, he would not be able to fully heal. Forgiving oneself is an essential key to getting better, says van der Kolk. It can come with time, awareness, and sometimes requires professional help. But the loving support of family and friends cannot be overstated. He was fortunate to have a mother who cared enough about him to confront him. Her words had truly shaken him. It was because of his mother's patience and meticulous care and encouragement that he was able to recover from his devastating injuries. He was deeply grateful to her and to all of the people who helped him. He wrote them all letters, thanking them for what they had done for him. Gratitude was another important marker on his path to healing. I know my dad was grateful for every day of his life, despite his pain and grief. He lived to the age of 91, and the caption on his favorite shirt read, "I want to live forever. So far, so good." I'm left to wonder, though, if the flashes of anger and violence that terrified us as kids and made us lash back out at him when we grew older could have been avoided, if he had had someone like Venderkoek to help him understand it. Eventually, the young man of the shark attack returned to Hawaii, to the same waters where he'd experienced his life-changing event. He paddleboarded with his dad. Many of those who had helped to rescue him were present. It was magical, he said. He felt surrounded by love. Trauma expresses itself in both body and mind. Only when you are able to integrate the two can you expect to feel truly whole again. There can be no separation. Your physical being can recover, but your mind can remain trapped in a seemingly endless cycle, reliving the traumatic event again and again. Therapist and expert on conflict and violence, Resmaa Menakem, underscores this reality. Racialized trauma, he writes, is embodied in all of us as the result of white body supremacy. Trauma is how we respond to events or series of events in order to survive. It makes sense in light of this relatively new understanding about how trauma is carried in our DNA, that we feel the effects of racism in our physical bodies. All of us, he says, white bodies and black bodies. It's why he accompanies each chapter in his revelatory book, My Grandmother's Hands, with physical exercises for the reader to complete as a way to begin healing from the destructive effects of racialized trauma. Moreover, he writes, trauma and healing are not always private, personal practices. It can be a collective experience. Think Rwanda, South Africa, any country that has experienced colonization, war, and strife. Think these United States of America. Dr. Rachel Remen is nationally recognized as a medical reformer and educator who sees the practice of medicine as a spiritual path. She tells us that it is our stories, the ones we tell about ourselves, the ones no one else can tell, that help us to heal. We are all healers of the world, she says. It's not about healing the world by making a huge difference, but healing the world in all the things we touch. We all feel we're not enough, that we don't have any power, but we are exactly what is needed. What we have to work with is our stories. Her patients sometimes ask her, "How can I make a difference when I am so wounded?" She responds, "It is our very wounds that enable us to make a difference." My dad was a wounded man and a person of color who, I am sure, felt the sting of racism in the majority white-bodied world he moved in. But despite his wounds, or rather because of his wounds, he made an impact on the people in his life. He was far from perfect. It makes me a little sad that not enough was known about PTSD during the time when he might have benefited from some understanding of it, his family too. Nevertheless, he knew enough to surround himself with a loving community and to give of himself to that community in the best way he knew how. So, the personal journey of healing becomes a collective one. Cut the ties you have to failure and shame, the poet Joy Harjo instructs us. Let go the pain you are holding in your mind, your shoulders, your heart, all the way to your feet. Let go the pain of your ancestors to make way for those who are heading our direction. Ask for forgiveness. Call upon the help of those who love you. These helpers take many forms: animals, element, bird, angel, saint, stone, or ancestor. Call your spirit back. It may be caught in corners and creases of shame, judgment, and human abuse. Now you can have a party. Invite everyone you know who loves and supports you. Keep room for those who have no place else to go. Then you must do this. Help the next person find their way through the dark. And may it be so.
Although this life is but a wraith, although we know not what we use, although we grope with little faith, give me the heart to fight and lose. Open my ears to music, let me thrill with spring's first flutes and drums, but never let me forget the bitter ballads of the slums. Ever insurgent let me be, make me more daring than devout. From sleek contentment keep me free, and fill me with a buoyant doubt. From compromise and things half done, keep me with stern and stubborn pride. And when at last the fight is won, oh, keep me still unsatisfied.
It's not about trying to heal the whole world and making a huge difference, but about healing the world that we touch. We all have stories of loss and disappointment, but it's up to us to make meaning from them and nourish others with those stories. It's up to us to help the next person find their way through the dark.